MFs. Welcome back. Hustle Like You Broke, mid-July. Today is the 9th. By the time we air, the after effects of the 4th of July should be well known across the United States. We're now 2 weeks removed from Dear Leader's comedy show in Tulsa, and they have seen a spike as a result already. We've entered phase 3. I'm calling this malazed and confused. It's that general sentiment of discomfort, uneasiness. No one knows where we're going. No one's fully aware of what the other side looks like, how we should act, what we should do. We spent a lot of time talking about, mostly I, truth be told, spent a lot of time talking about where the problem lies. We did have a spirited discussion with Patrick Dearson last week. Anyone who hasn't heard that episode, I encourage them to check it out. It's 2 parts. Patrick was actually the first one who got me to acknowledge that the problem is not just the President of the United States. Leadership is definitely a factor. There's no question in my mind. He plays a major role in where we are right now and why things are not better under control. He seems to think ignore the problem and it'll go away. We're seeing in Sweden what happens when you ignore the problem and let it go away. They thought herd immunity was coming to them. Not only do they have more deaths per capita than almost anywhere else in the world right now, but their economy is tanking too. It did not help them to stay open. That said, we've got an election coming up. There are 4 months to go. The internet, the news cycle, the speed with which information moves these days means we need to stay vigilant and on point in our focus and resolve to remove Dear Leader at all costs. He will do everything he can to obfuscate, to distract, to confuse. But I don't even blame him for it. He thinks this is a game. And he thinks he's going to win this game because so far he is. But it's not him that's the problem. He's just one man. It's the enablers. It's the willfully blind. It's those who support his agenda. It's the media that spreads misinformation loud and clear. I don't know if anybody's followed the story about Tucker Carlson. He got sued. I don't know the entire premise, but his own attorneys in court argued that in spite of being one of the most prominent figures in cable news, he is not, in fact, bound to speak the truth. Because at the end of the day, he's an entertainer and not a newsman. And his audience knows this. Or so his own attorneys argued in court. Think about that. So we're getting our news from entertainers. We, he, they, whomever, people that listen and subscribe to that batshit crazy reality. We live in a post-fact world. I had this argument with my father, who's a very well-educated person, and it pained me to do so, but I argued that we live in a world where facts no longer matter. Of course, my father argued otherwise. Of course, facts matter. Or do they? I mean, if you have a loud enough voice, as the president does with his Twitter feed, he can say anything he wants, and a certain percentage of the population will believe it's true. So, with that in mind, what can we do? Well, we can vote. So, every podcast between now and November, that is what I am going to say. Please remember to vote. It's your civic duty. It's your responsibility as a human, as a citizen of the world. If not for yourself, if not for your family, not for your friends, do it for the future of the country that you think is, should be, could be great, some form or fashion, whatever the fuck that means. I'm not even sure anymore. But please, anyone who threatens to withhold education funds if we don't force our children back into the classroom this fall, of course, all of us parents want our children back in the fucking classroom, but not at the risk of killing vulnerable citizens. There's a camp somewhere in Arkansas or something I saw in the news the other day where the disease spread like wildfire and they had to cancel sessions because a number of the children got this. This is affecting children now. And we need to get past it. That's all I'm going to say. As always, I'm joined by my three amazing co-hosts, the incomparable Christine Dallas. Hello, Dallas.
Hello, how are we today?
I'm doing okay, Dallas. Although I do see that things are not so good in Florida right now.
Nope.
Do you feel like the walls are closing in on you?
Something like that. It just feels like that little bit of hope we had is now shot. So we feel like we're going backwards here, or just in general. But anyway, yeah, sun's still shining though. That's good. But other than that, nothing really too happy, positive to report. I'm glad I'm not in the restaurant business. I feel sorry for those folks. They've had to close their doors again, close their dining rooms again. I think they're letting this back on the beach, but gyms are still back and forth. You know, everybody, it's tough.
And from sunny Southern California, my brother Banks is in the house today. Brother Banks.
What's going on over here?
You actually, before we started recording, alluded to the fact that restaurants seem to be open in Southern California in spite of the regression that we've seen. Is that the case?
Oh yeah, it's confusing as hell in Southern California right now. Not just restaurants, bars. I have several little, dive bars in my neighborhood. They closed for a couple of days, but now they're fully back open, serving customers. Like right now, if I take a walk right now, it's almost 10 o'clock in the morning, and they're open with people. Restaurants as well. It's a little weird.
It's mind-boggling. And I said, as always, joined by my three co-hosts, but the truth is we've missed one of our co-hosts last week. So I am grateful for one that he is back with us today. Mr. Motherfucker himself, Kyle Hamilton, how are you?
Good Thursday evening. How are you?
Fantastic. Are you enjoying your crunch berries?
It's a crunch berry free day. More of a it's more of an orange juice day. Freshly squeezed.
I'm a little confused. Now the world feels even more upside down. Not a crunch berries day?
Nah, it's not a crunch berry day. Trying to regain my balance. It's been a rough few days, but other than that, I'm still above ground, as you would say.
Well, we are grateful to have you above ground. We are glad to know that things are shaping up in your world. Are you still on the keto diet?
No, I put it on pause for a minute. I'm going to reconvene in August. On a month, off a month, something like that.
Well, we wish you well with that. Good health. And keep that balance.
It's all about balance, and if you're not healthy, you can't be balanced. So there it is.
Well, our guest today knows a little something about health and balance. He is our second international guest on the program, so we look forward to hearing some of his perspective. Certainly, my focus in my intros tend to veer towards a more localized US based demographic, but we do have some international audience. We certainly aspire to more. We certainly speak about global issues. All of us are affected in the concert industry by what is happening in this world. He does have a British accent, but make no mistake, he is not a petite man. He does not wear tweed, to my knowledge. He is not likely sipping tea on his break from the women's wear department at Harrods. On the contrary, he is, I want to say, 6'10" to paint the picture for our audience. He is a very substantial individual, tattoos up and down his arms, long, curly, blondish, graying hair, beard last I knew. And, this guy, not only does he do both venue and personal security, something we'd like to hear more about so he can lend some perspective to our audience on that world of which we've not had another guest in the security realm. He has worked with all of us on Kendrick Lamar. He has also worked with race car driver Lewis Hamilton. Speaks very highly of a young American singer-songwriter, Charlie Puth. Has substantial experience with the Kardashian clan. Does not work strictly in the concert realm. He is often doing covert missions in places like Sierra Leone, recovering stolen diamonds or some batshit crazy something like that. We'll have to get into that in just a moment. I've recently discovered he has quite a team, referred to them as the A-Team. One of my all-time favorite programs. Not entirely clear if he's Hannibal, B.A., Faceman, or Murdoch. So why don't we find out without further ado, Mason Haynes.
Hey guys, how's it going? Nice to hear your voices. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Good to talk in these troubling times.
Well, it's good to have you. It's always good to be in touch. The last time I saw you was actually late January of this year. I was overseas on tour. You came to visit a bunch of us in London.
Yeah, that's right. I actually forgot about that. But yeah, that's 100%. I was wondering where you were going with it, and then I actually really had a flashback to remember that period. Yeah, I was just passed through into central London. Saw you guys had some food, right?
And at the time, I mean, what was crazy to me thinking back on it, it feels like so long ago, but it really was just earlier this year. But at the time, as we were touring through the UK and across Europe, we're hearing more and more about this virus. And it felt like everyone there was much more mindful and aware of what was coming. I feel like when we went to Paris just a couple days after we saw you in London, it was right when the first case popped up there. So it was early still, but there's still a lot more awareness that this thing was coming, this thing was real. And when I say more, I mean more so than in the United States. So we don't want to spend too much time talking about the COVID-19, but as an international guest, and before you can tell us a little more about, your background, I mean, how are things there? What the fuck is going on? And lend us some global perspective.
So I mean, there's definitely some debate about whether we locked down early enough, and I think that's like a common thread throughout Europe that people are kind of asking that question. we have a much lighter touch kind of police force than much of the other world. Much of the other countries in Europe, for example, Germany and Paris or Germany and France have a much more militarized kind of policing. So it was, and they're actually smaller. I mean, Paris is only, I think, 10, not even 10, it's 4 or 5 million people. It's not even that. It's a low population. So it's kind of easier to control. And you have to remember that most of the police force in the UK aren't actually armed. So like majority, I'd say 75% of the people, the police in the UK don't have weapons. So that kind of underlying enforcement ability doesn't really exist here. So, our lockdown was very much more voluntary, if that makes sense. Whereas Paris was enforced with kind of huge fines. France was enforced with huge fines. Spain was enforced with huge fines. You'd be getting a sort of a €600 fine if you were, and that's like what, $700 fine if you were caught in a car with somebody else that wasn't from your family, right? Even if you're heading to the shops or whatever, you could only walk your dog in Spain. That was the only exception to going outside of your house, other than going to the pharmacy or for like food. So the rest of Europe felt like they took it a little bit more seriously than the UK, and I think that the spread of our disease was kind of like a lot broader, and it lasted quite a while. We had a pretty kind of like high peak, but I think we're definitely over the crush right now. Like we definitely feel like we've moved to the next phase. I think we're in phase 3 now. London's actually one of the places that's had the best results with the lowest R rate in the country, actually, and I think that's probably because it's difficult to say, but I think London was very much a focus of intent for the whole operation, and London often becomes this kind of bastion or focal point for the UK, and that's in investment, in finance, in logistics, economics, in everything, and in health. So that's probably why. But the R rate's pretty low right now, and we're still having like 100 deaths a day or something, but it's nothing crazy.
Yeah, I would say by comparison, we're dealing with thousands per day still, and where you talk about being past the hump, we are still in what our esteemed Dr. Fauci refers to as the first wave.
It's 1830.
Sorry about
that. Okay. Mason is playing with toys and apparently loading his gun and what have you in the background for those that can hear the little clicks and what have you that is going on. We can only imagine. But good to hear you are healthy and things are better there.
Yeah.
Certainly, we are envious of your ability to not only say that the worst is behind you, but that you are able to more freely move about the continent.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but they're still trying to stimulate the economy in kind of bizarre ways. Because, as I said in our brief discussion before the podcast, that unfortunately the seed of fear has been planted, and that seed of fear is reflected massively in kind of the economic move forward. People are scared to go to the shops. People are scared to go to restaurants. People definitely don't want to catch it. People definitely don't, after seeing all the horrific kind of images on the news, people definitely are reticent to become part of a herd indoctrination, let's say.
Now, you say that as if that's a bad thing, though. I would argue it's quite good. Should people not be mindful and concerned?
I mean, right. I mean, I guess you have to look at this. I mean, from my perspective, it's different. I kind of look at it in a different way. British people have a very strange, or actually the whole West has a very strange relationship with death, because we kind of live in denial. We live in huge denial every day. We don't really deal with our mortality as Western civilization, and because we have this strange arm's length relationship with death, the whole concept of it'll never happen to me is carried through, and I think that's most well demonstrated in the US, right? People still get shocked when people die. It's kind of strange to me. So like you'll hear someone's died in a car wreck or a heart attack, or or someone fell down the stairs or whatever it might be, cause of death, and people are just shocked. But people die. I mean, it's just relentless. People are dying all the time. Of course, it's shocking because it's such a final thing. It's a finality, right? But the reality is that tens of thousands of people die every single day. So we shouldn't be too shocked, and in the grand scheme of things, we've been extremely lucky with COVID. COVID is like a shot across the bow of what could have happened. Because real story, COVID is it's pandemic light, right? It's diet pandemic, because if you had the spread rate of COVID and the mortality rate of Ebola, then you can panic. Then you can really think, oh shit, we're in trouble, right? Then you've got something to really deal with. But the reality is actually COVID is significant, of course, but it's not. It could have been so much worse. It could have been so much worse.
Interesting perspective. I appreciate that. So let's back it up, because our podcast focuses more on the music business as we knew it before, and we hope it will again one day be, and not simply intended to be a moment in time that encapsulates what is happening in the world right now. So I did my best to piece together what I know of your bio, but to be honest, I'm sure there's so much more to the story that I don't know, and I would welcome you to tell us.
I mean, my bio.
How did you get your start? You talk. I know you well enough, personally as well as professionally, to know that you talk about a time when you were young and you weren't the biggest guy, and you weren't, lifting heavily and on tour. Talking to the rest of us about all of. Please.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I'm a pretty regular guy. I was always unusually tall as a kid, and I think when you're a child, sort of, let's say when you're 10 till 16, 17 years old, there's a propensity within that kind of age group that everybody wants to be the same. They want the same haircut, they want the same shoes, they want the same school bag, they listen to the same music, and there's a certain part of a child that wants to fit in, and certainly not to stand out from the crowd, right? And anything that kind of denotes you as different, and that could be, your weight or your disability or the color of your hair or the fact that you wear glasses. It could be any one of those kind of things, can have an effect that separates you out from the crowd and makes you a target, right? And that was kind of what happened to me. Because I'm tall, because I'm extremely tall, and I was always a lot taller than everybody else, and I was a skinny kid, and it made me kind of the kid that was picked last for sports, and just because I was kind of like a gangly giraffe kind of kid, and obviously that that kind of objectification gives you a certain start in life, because you realize that the world isn't always a kind of cool and nice and loving place, and not everybody's going to be open arms and come and sit by the fire and hot cocos and cookies and all that kind of shit. So it definitely defines you to a certain degree, and my bullying kind of progressively got worse and worse and worse as I got taller and taller and taller and skinnier, and it kind of it culminated in a perfect storm where there was a kid that was sent back from what you guys would probably describe as like a young offenders prison. This is back in the sort of late 80s. He was 18. He was sent back into a class of 15 and 16-year-olds, and just unleashed on the kid that was the easiest target, which was me at the time. And although I was having some severe beatings daily, I had my wrist broken, I had my jaw broken by this kid. I never went to the authorities. I never grasped him up. I just I came up with accident excuses. Oh, I fell down the stairs, whatever. And then eventually my parents found out because my mum accidentally walked in on me on the bath, which is never a good thing when you're a 15-year-old kid. And I was just covered in bruises, and I kind of, I had a bit of a meltdown, and and then it got resolved. But I made a pact with myself after the age of 16 that would never happen again. And at that point, I took it upon myself to sort of hit the gym and start getting much more involved in the martial arts and boxing and that kind of stuff. And I guess I changed it up. I kind of decided that I'd lost control of my life, and I regained control by controlling my physicality, and in turn my mentality. Those two things are obviously intrinsically linked throughout our lives. Healthy mind, healthy body. And I guess someone asked me actually the other day whether if I met the kid that did that to me, whether I'd beat him up or whether I'd smash him up, or what, I can't remember what he said. Fuck him up, I think he said. And I said, actually, I don't think I would. I'd probably more likely to shake his hand, because although at that period in my life it was very dark, the reality is that much of what he did to me is kind of carved out my life right now. So, you have to take the obstacles and turn them into opportunities, right? That's the way to move forward. So, yeah, that's kind of my school life in a nutshell.
Well, I hope our listeners can already understand why, when contemplating who from the security world we should bring on the program, you were the one we thought of. I appreciate that perspective, and tell us how that then transitions into a life of professional security, and a little bit about what you've done. Again, the difference between both personal and venue, so our listeners can understand.
I studied we did my regular schooling, got my exams, then I went to sixth form college. And after sixth form, I took a break, and I got wrapped up with the MOD, which is the Ministry of Defence in the UK. And I worked for those guys for a couple of years doing security, straight out of the fire kind of thing. And then at some point I decided, I'm a creative, so I was always kind of artistic, and I love to draw and paint and all that kind of stuff. So at some point I kind of fell out of bed with the things that I was doing for the Ministry of Defence, and I decided to go back to university. This is like when I'm about 22 or something. And at that point, my parents weren't like big on thinking that they were going to support me through my university career. So I kind of had to have an almost full-time job. And the only thing I knew really was the security thing. So whilst I was at university, I set up a little small security company, which kind of we did pubs and bars and clubs and all that kind of stuff in the local major town. And that was my gig. So the daytime I'd be studying, doing like product design and branding and kind of marketing. And in the evenings I'd be working on the door, and I'd have 4 or 5 other guys working on the door in the same town as me, just doing that kind of stuff. And that kind of transgressed into working in London, like some of the biggest venues in London, working for a company called Scorpion Security. And I quickly went up the ranks in Scorpion Security, and then I started doing a few private gigs here and there. At the end of my university career, whilst I was working in London doing security and still studying, I got an opportunity to go and work in Ibiza. And I think, I don't know, as a doorman, you have a kind of unfair advantage, because effectively what you're doing when you go to a nightclub to work as a doorman, bouncer, whatever you want to call us, you're effectively going out with your 10 hardest friends. So it doesn't really matter who rolls up at the club. It's not going to be a problem, because there's 10 of you. You're not drinking. You're not drunk. You're not compromised. And we're sitting there waiting for it to happen. And if you're going to kick off, then that's a decision you're going to make last minute. So you're kind of walking into a trap, effectively. But it didn't fill me, because of my schooling and because of my lack of confidence in my own physical ability. Even though from school till sort of 18, 19 years old, I'd managed to pack on kind of 9 or 10 stone, which is like 140 pounds. So I went from being 140 pounds to 280 pounds between between leaving school and being 20 years old, 21 years old, something like 22 years old. So I was like 280 and 6'10", but I still didn't have the confidence in myself because of this bullying situation that just sat heavy in my head that I could do the work on my own. So I kind of made the executive decision to get myself into an environment where there was no backup, there was no one to rely on, there was no one to help me out. And I took this job in Ibiza, and at the time Ibiza was like a mecca for football hooligans and just drama, and this was World Cup year, 98. And I worked in a bar on my own for the entire summer period, and it was a 400 capacity venue, and it was me. And you can imagine, we fought every night I fought every night of the week, 7 nights a week, probably 4 or 5 fights a night for 7 nights a week for 6 months. And that definitely was my baptism by fire and the making of the man, so to speak. Yeah. So that kind of takes you up till 98. That was kind of that was myself pushing myself to prove to myself that it wasn't just my backup that gave me the bolster. It was something that I was capable of doing alone, and I didn't need a big team behind me to galvanize myself. Yeah, so that was kind of up to 98, end of 98. Yeah.
I've always thought of this phrase in basketball that you can't teach height. And I always loved that one because you can teach the skills, but in your case, you learn the skills and then you actually put yourself in a situation where you had no choice but to effectively toughen up at the same time.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, I think it's everyone. I mean, listen, anyone can be a security guy or a bodyguard or a doorman, whatever, a bouncer, until it's time to be a bouncer. And in the same way that anyone can be a soldier until it's time to be a soldier, right? It's like you can wear the clothes and you can have the torch and the gloves and the whole look, but when shit goes down, like if you're not there, then you're not doing it, and that's not who you are. Do you see? It's kind of like that. You have to. I think, and that's true in all walks of life, right? In every job that people choose to do, it's very easy to say that you do it, but do you do it? Do you do it when it comes down to it? That's the thing.
Well, what's the Mike Tyson quote? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. And the truth of it is that every civilization, the foundation stone of every civilization is based on violence. That's the thing. That's the ultimate. That's the equalizer, right? I mean, it's not. I guess not everybody would want to admit that, but the guy that stood in Hyde Park at Speaker's Corner with the ability to have free speech, who's a radical Muslim, saying that he wants to bring the UK down and this, that, and the other, and he wants Sharia law, etc., etc., etc. His right to say that is underwritten by extreme violence that the government would carry out. Should that? Do you understand? It's like the violence is the ultimate settler. That's the problem, and that's the problem throughout history as well. It's not a problem, but it's something that people don't. It's the kind of the great unspoken. That's the thing. You could be a pacifist, but your pacifism is underwritten by extreme violence. Just so you know. Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, you get peace through war.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you want peace, prepare for war, right?
Exactly. I feel like now would be a good time to point out that though you are clearly a high-minded and philosophical individual, that's, again, this background in fighting certainly informs your perspective. And it reminds me of the time in Dallas. You were right there with me. And Chris, I think you saw it too, where we had 2 people at front of house on tour. We won't say their names. I do know at least one of them listens to this podcast. And there was some dispute between them. There was some trash talking and agitation. And Mason, you were someone on tour who, again, believing in fitness, had always been there and working out with Rob and Rico in the band and certain others, just trying to help them, in terms of their fitness. And you proposed a boxing match between these 2 individuals. And that actually did happen. And I don't remember there really being a clear winner to this fight. I would argue there was, but
You were there.
okay, well, yeah, yeah.
You were
Yeah,
there.
I think somebody lost. I wasn't,
Well,
but I heard
let's
somebody
say
got.
he didn't get knocked the fuck out, but it was definitely a one-sided fight before long. But the best thing that came out of it, the outcome, was not just that one person banged up the other. It was that the trash talking between them ceased.
100%, and it was kind of, I think, I mean, again, let's not say names, but the reality is that I think everyone, and I'm sure Chris will testify to this, that everyone was kind of getting a bit bored of the back and forward of it on the bus. Like every time we moved from A to B, there was this trash talking, but there was never really a resolution. And I just I'm a guy for resolutions. I like to see things just quashed or stopped, or and if people are gonna I'm not a big on talking. Like if anyone ever gets into a kind of like a heated discussion with me, and the whole thing about bark being worse than your bite, like I don't really bark, but I love to bite. So like my whole story is like I won't bullshit with you back and forward about like threatening you or this, that, and the other. If you piss me off enough, then I'm coming. And it's not going to be. There's going to be no talking. And I think that that's a good way to live, in the sense that you know what you get, right? It's not. And also the fact is you're drawing a clear line. And I think those clear lines. I think there's a certain piece of society right now, and a certain piece of like the machismo or masculine society now, that are spending quite a lot of time apologizing for being a man or for being male, and that bothers me a lot. So I'm definitely not apologizing for being male, and I think the things that should be settled. I think men shouldn't talk shit; they should act.
People talk shit till you get that chin tested.
Exactly, and that's the story. Like exactly, until you've been hit, until you've experienced it. Then you don't really know, right? It's one of those things that and the talking stops, as Matt rightly said. When that boxing match took place, and majority of the crew turned out to watch and support their side, whoever they were supporting.
Pay-per-view.
Yeah, exactly, pay-per-view. And and it was as Matt rightly says, it was settled. And certainly, one of the members of, or one of the two guys involved in that, became, in my opinion anyway, because I worked with him again on a tour following that, became a very humble and really. I felt like there was a character shift, and it was for the better. Anyway, that's what I experienced. That's all I can say.
Yeah, chin failure will make you act right. So
I think it definitely it gave him confidence. I think it definitely changed and shaped his character for the better. I will say for the record that I'm not so much about talking about what is a man's job and how a man should act in fighting and what have you. I don't think is always the solution, but I do believe that bickering and the ongoing exchange of bullshit is the problem, that and when a problem festers, it needs resolution.
And to be clear,
then so be it. I'm all about the solution and not perpetuation of the problem.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not saying that violence is the answer to all problems. What I'm saying is that if you're gonna bitch and whine as a man, then you need to step up rather than bitch and whine, because it's not an attractive quality. A man bitching and whining is not an attractive quality, and it doesn't bode well for the future when people can't just settle their differences and move on. Things need to be there needs to be resolution in all things. It has to be taken care of. Things have to be taken care of. Take care of business,
especially on the road.
Yeah, because because that can create like a whole, and I think that did exist to a certain degree on within certain factions of that group. Like there was definitely a kind of, he said, she said kind of thing going on, And one of the things which frustrated me about that is that when I proposed the boxing match and I offered my training to both parties, one of the parties told me that nothing I could teach him would make his job easier, because he was going to have such an easy ride when he won the fight.
And he lost.
Well, he was the one who got his ass kicked. Exactly.
Chin checked.
But let's move on from that. That's we could talk about that story all day long. I think we're saying mostly the same thing, and point made by Chris about what happens when situations fester on the road is not healthy for the tour party overall. So
Yeah, and I think that translates.
situation
Yeah,
was resolved,
yeah, absolutely.
and we are moving on. So you were a bouncer who got in 4 or 5 nights a week in Ibiza, of all places,
Seven,
and
seven,
that then led you.
seven
I'm
nights a
sorry.
week. 7 nights a week for 6 months. We didn't have days off. We had days off. We didn't have nights off. So it was ongoing.
Point taken.
Yeah.
Fight Club.
But
So
yeah,
that then effectively sounds like Fight Club, yes. But that then leads to an opportunity at some point on tour. Tell us about that.
So yeah, but there's quite a big separation between my touring time and what when that was. So now we're moving to kind of like 99, 2000. I came back from Ibiza and I was looking for work, and I became the minder, or when it's someone who's, let's say, let's describe the person as from grey business that you become a minder and you're not a bodyguard. You're someone who's looking after someone's interests, who has a high threat or risk kind of profile, and he was involved in lots of things that we certainly won't be discussing on the podcast, but he was somebody who was a high risk target in London, operating in shady circles, and I again was kind of thrust into the situation where I was dealing with him and his obstacles day to day, and I was becoming way too involved in the other aspects of the things that he was doing, and at some point I re-engaged with a girl that I knew from university, and she got pregnant, and she gave me an ultimatum, which was either you're going to come with me to live in Norway and we're going to have a child together and you're going to stop doing all the shit that you're doing now, or I'm going to go to Norway, have the kid, and you're not going to be involved. And that was a pretty clear message, and I decided that I was going to stop the stuff that I was doing in London, the minding, the bodyguarding, with this particular character that I was looking after, and that I would go to Norway and try and start what you would describe as a normal life, and have a little family and do all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so there we moved to Norway together, and we had the child, and we'd kind of like penciled in an agreement that said that we would have the first. I mean, I went from earning or kind of earning very, very, very good money in London at that time, to securing myself a job, a 9-to-5 job in an office as an art director using my university art degree, and it just didn't fit. There was no fit there for me. I was kind of going through the motions, but I was not happy, and I wasn't fulfilled, and I felt trapped, and it was something that I swore that I would never do, which was the 9-to-5, and it kind of went against every grain and every part of me to do that. And then when my son was a year old, I had the opportunity to go back to London to do a job, like a brief piece of work, a security job, and then I ended up going back to London, doing this piece of work and realising that that's where my heart was, still in London, still in security. And I went back and worked again for Scorpion Security as operations director. And through that experience, I was introduced to a guy who is called, I won't give you his name, but he's an ultra high net worth individual. He was worth, at the time, he was probably worth 400 or 500 million pounds, and now he's worth in excess of £2.5 billion. He was the founder member of a company called Just Eat, and Just Eat is your equivalent of Deliveroo, I suppose. Do you have Deliveroo in America? I guess you do, or something similar to that, like Postmates.
Mm-hmm.
Uber Eats.
Yeah, Postmates, and I was with him, and I think he became Denmark's 5th richest man during the time I was working for him, and I was with him for 10 years. And I became his right-hand man, and he was very much a playboy, and we traveled the world, and together. He was kind of living the dream, ladies and countries and boats and Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all that kind of stuff. And he ended up buying a big villa back into Ibiza. And whilst I was in Ibiza, towards the end of my career, I got the opportunity to work with the Kardashians because they came to the island with my great friend and mentor, Pascal. And that was where I first met Pascal. And Pascal said to me that during the time we were working together, it was only a 2-day visit, that he would, as many bodyguards will say to you or to say to security guys, oh, when I come to London, I'll give you a call. And I didn't take that seriously because you hear that all the time in many walks of life. But true to his word, he came to London, and I don't know whether it was kismet or not, but he got very sick as he arrived into London, and he was with 2 of the family members. Again, I won't name names, but he was very sick, and he said to me, can you come and cover me? Because I'm here and I'm super sick and I need a couple of days off. And I mean, knowing Pascal as I know him now, that's insane for me to think that he would do that, because he's just like he's a warrior. So it takes all kinds of sick for him to take time off. And then my introduction to Kanye and that life kind of led me into touring, led me into the celebrity A-list BG kind of world, and that was how I moved into entertainment and the touring life, as you say.
So Pascal Duvier, by the way, is his name. For those who don't know, he is, I would say, a legendary figure in the world of personal as well as concert venue security, somebody we all know and appreciate very much, and another hulking gentleman who, you're right, I can't even imagine him taking a day off. I've called him and said, do you have a guy to go cover this here in this part of the world, that part of the world? And not only does he always know somebody somewhere, no matter how random that place may be, but often enough he will say, oh, I'll do that. And anywhere he can go, he will. And he's got a voracious appetite for working, and a great guy. So I appreciate your acknowledgement of him. But so to a question I alluded to before, so most of what you've done then up till this point has been personal security in nature, but certainly when touring with those of us on this call, you've done what's called venue security. Can you tell us about the differences, please?
I mean, they're radically different. They're radically different arenas. Radically different. Can you hear me, Matt? You've got me right.
Yeah. I think they're
radically different arenas, and I think venues very much venues are very much more technical piece of the puzzle, and it's a kind of it's more structural and logistics. I mean, if I could talk you through a normal day, which would be that we would arrive at the venue and we would immediately effectively take control of the venue from the point of view of the point man for security, for all kind of liaison between crew management and security staff and higher echelon management of the venue as regards security. We will then kind of map out the entire exit strategy and emergency strategies for what we would describe as a fast exit from the building. So we kind of create all that mapping and make sure that mapping's available to everybody in their various locations, rooms, etc., etc. And then we would kind of have meetings with the staff to make sure that they were towing the same line that we had kind of sent out in advance. The advanced security rider, which is effectively a document that sort of prescribes all the protocols that we would like to be administered during the time that we are at the venue. Make sure that they're all on the same page and make sure that they know all their positions and the expectation that we have for them. And then we would effectively rehearse or be involved in the dry rehearsals that were taking place and make sure that we knew the routes, maps, and kind of positions and everything that was going on with the rehearsal and the venue as a whole. And then we would be the guys that liaise directly with the artist security as they arrive. and make sure that the artist is escorted to his various dressing rooms or backstage areas, whichever he wants. Managing kind of laminates and lanyards and all that kind of stuff, so that everyone's clearly identified as part of the crew, and make sure that the artist has access to his guests, etc., and make sure that they're sequestered in the right places, and make sure that if there is a meet and greet, that's well handled. I mean, it's a kind of it's a very much all-encompassing security role, which covers every aspect of the venue, the engagements, the logistics, the movements, the escape plans, the medical procedures, the medical positioning. I mean, it goes on, but it's very much more a technical interface, and it's actually quite unusual for a personal guy to be tasked with doing venue, because they're so polarized. They're very, very different pursuits. But you're effectively responsible for, I mean, as soon as we arrive at the venue, from a technical perspective, the head of venue security for the tour is effectively head of security for the whole venue building, and that's really you're the buck stops with you kind of thing for all the problems that may occur during the time that we are, inhabiting the venue. So yeah, right from 7 a.m. in the morning till often 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, when the last of the artist guests would leave, and make sure that everyone arrives safely and leaves safely, and be the guy that effectively is the last out and locks the door. Real story.
So just to catch our listeners up again, where I joked earlier that you can't teach height. And certainly when it comes to personal, there is a certain mindfulness that is always involved. But on the venue side, as you're saying, the venue security is often the first person into the building, and certainly looking at plans for the building, involved in diagrams and dressing room considerations in advance, often working with a person like a Christine, who will be mapping out which artist goes in which dressing room, which office belongs where, then front facing or interfacing with venue security, who is involved in parking all of the buses and the personnel behind the stage, getting guests in and out safely, contemplating active shooter protocols, and everything that could potentially essentially go wrong from beginning until end of the night. So a situation like, heaven forbid, Ariana Grande and the Manchester Arena is something that you, Mason, prepare for on a daily basis. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge position of responsibility, and I don't think you can underestimate the kind of the buck stops with you mentality when it comes to that aspect, because when things go, security is a strange business, because when things go right, you often don't get acknowledgement, but when things go wrong, you're sure as hell going to hear about it. It's like that kind of scenario. So yeah, I mean, it's all encompassing. The Ariana Grande situation, it was obviously a huge disaster, and that was, I can only think that the security rider didn't prescribe clearly enough that the in-house staff should remain throughout the performance, and that they shouldn't wheedle down the staff as the performance took place, compromising the security. I think what happened is that the voluminous amount of security that they had on entry was reduced down to skeleton staff during the performance, because they were lackadaisical, or whether it was a costing issue or whatever it might be. And the skeleton staff obviously didn't have any control mechanism for parents arriving to meet their children, etc. And that was where the bomb went off, when parents were waiting in the foyer, and all those parents and greeters or meters of young children and kids, or lots of young adolescent girls, were basically, the parents were allowed to enter into the foyer without being security checked or have any kind of clearance or passes or anything, and they were allowed to gather in that area. And unfortunately, the bomber took advantage of that, and he queued up, or he stood within the parental group, and obviously, created the facade that he was waiting for someone, and detonated himself, and the rest is history, I guess.
Well, and complicating that situation, of course, is the fact that underneath the Manchester Arena is a train station. So security there becomes even more complicated to manage.
Yeah, but I mean that's not. I mean, I don't really see that as an excuse, because that train station didn't get built during the Ariana Grande concert. That was something that was an existing situation. Is that the security for that should always have been a factor, and the fact that it wasn't a factor doesn't mean that that's right. It just means that was overlooked, and for whatever reason, the SOPs for parents coming off the train to meet their families, friends, and children was an overlooked element, and that's an oversight, and it's unfortunate, because I think it was like 54 people died, and 50 something, I think, and that was purely and simply because of a security failing. Because if there had been a perimetered access that was controlled, not only for entry but for exit, and for meeting and arrival, then that would have potentially saved a lot of lives. I don't think it wouldn't have. I think the bomb would have still gone off, but I think he would have been stopped at one of the outer perimeters and not been able to catch into the inner sanctum and do the damage he did.
Well, I certainly didn't mean to make an excuse. Quite the contrary. I was trying to reinforce the importance of the position of venue security, the vigilance required, and the reason why every single day there needs to be someone or multiple someones who are mindful of those possibilities. On a much smaller, not to draw any comparison, but I do know in another situation in my mind that happens. I don't know if we were in Austria or wherever we were, but just in terms of self-awareness and understanding, it was one of those venues that allowed backpacks, which of course we typically would not. I don't know why it was allowed in this case. Perhaps it was a purse. You may remember this situation, Mason. And a security guard that was right at the front of the thrust was taking backpacks or purses from people in the first few rows.
That was Norway. It was Norway.
Norway, okay. And generously, in his mind, storing them for people underneath the stage. And of course, I freaked the fuck out as soon as you brought me up to speed on that. And promoter came out and apologizing, and the person had to be repositioned. And these are things that we and you as a venue professional in that instance have to be mindful of every single night.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, listen, there's the funny thing about security, and especially when you're in, the higher echelons of, A-list, personal or venue, whatever that might be, is that every person that you meet wants your job. So when you go to a festival, everyone wants your job. When you go to a concert, everybody wants your job. But the reality is that there's a very, very, and this is not me being egotistical or arrogant in any shape or form. It just needs to be said that there's a very, very low percentage of people that can transition from baseline security up into the higher echelons, because you live on your failings. You're only as good as your last success. You're only good as your last living client, let's say. And when people, and what happened in Norway was they for whatever reason they had a young girl. I think she was only 18 or 19, maybe 20. And she'd been, because they have this egalitarian, which is great, egalitarian kind of attitude in security in Norway, where they like to have as many women as men in the front line, which is fantastic, as long as the capability's there. Put her in a very, very important position, which was left of the stage thrust. And as Matthew says, she took it upon herself, thinking that she was being righteous and generous with her kind of with her shift time that she would actually, store, as you say, backpacks underneath the thrust to make sure that they were safe and secure for the people in the crowd. What she hadn't taken into account is that obviously that was a massive compromise of the artist and venue security and safety across the board. I told her in no uncertain terms, and that wasn't well received. And because obviously it kind of made me angry. And she, I think I can't remember exactly what happened to her, but she was certainly moved to another location. And that was the story. And it was a huge failing, and I'm sure something she'll never ever do again. But again, it's a learning curve. Like all careers, it's a learning curve. So yeah.
So I made a joke earlier about this A team that you are a part of and your stories in Sierra Leone. Can you expand upon that just briefly for our listeners so they understand that I wasn't making that up, and there is something beyond the concert touring that you are part of at this time?
There's actually a thread throughout my career of me kind of testing myself and trying to put myself into positions where I'll be challenged. And the Sierra Leone opportunity came to me through a Jewish connection of mine, a gentleman who's got an interesting name. He was called Ronnie Goligoski. And he was a buyer or procurer of diamonds. And he had the opportunity to go to Sierra Leone to buy stones. And it kind of sounded exciting to me. So when I was asked about West Africa, prior to this, I'd spent quite a lot of time in South Africa and kind of the more Gentile places in Africa, like Mozambique and kind of Kenya, those kind of places, but never kind of put my toe in the bath of the more dangerous places. And when I was asked if I'd ever been there before, probably foolishly at the time, I was like, yeah, I've spent a lot of time in West Africa. And the question was, have you got your yellow fever certificate? And I said, of course I have, like, et cetera, et cetera. And I kind of figured it out in the interim period between agreeing to do it and getting down there. And it was kind of like a life-changing moment for me to be exposed to that level of real adverse poverty and neglect, but also fantastic natural beauty and the countryside being phenomenal, and the adrenaline of dealing with kind of diamonds and gold. It was definitely a kind of an epiphany moment in my life, and I've continued to be involved, not with Ronnie anymore, but now much more involved with the company, and I've actually been allocated 5% of the company that I used to visit as a protector of people buying stones from the company. And I was supposed to be there in March, but obviously through COVID, Africa's one of the places which I think is going to be very badly affected, and that trip was cancelled. And we're just waiting to go now. I've got an appointment on the 1st of August. Well, it's in the diary to go and get my multi-entry visa to get back into Sierra Leone, and we're going to start exporting again. Obviously, the bodyguarding side of the business has been extremely badly affected by COVID. But the gold and the diamond thing is always going to be a nice little back burner, money earner, and hopefully we're hoping that we'll be doing 2 exports a month from August. So that may be a very serious game changer, and it's something we've been working on for 7 years. So yeah, we feel like we've cracked the code, and we're moving forward with it. My business partner and majority shareholder is a guy called Tony Finnegan. He's a guy that was a premier football. It's a kind of a strange story, but he was a premier footballer in the UK leagues, and he was also a scout for FIFA. And he was down in West Africa scouting Angola and Sierra Leone and a few other places. And in Sierra Leone, he scouted Nigel Reo-Coker, who's a very famous Sierra Leonean player, and obviously that kind of galvanized some interest from the government, and the government were very keen to make Tony happy, and they offered him, this is sort of 12, 13 years ago, this is before my time, but offered him a gold and diamond export license as a kind of golden handshake for helping them out with getting, you know, West African players into the UK and the US leagues. And and he's a, you know, Tony's an extremely diligent and lovely guy, and one of my very, very close friends. And he's always been as good as his word. And we've done some fairly substantial exports in the multi-million-dollar exports from Sierra Leone and rough stones and gold, and and it's kind of been an ongoing relationship which I value very much, and that polarization between the true abject poverty that you see in somewhere like Freetown, which is the capital, and the exposure you have to the lifestyle of an A-lister. I think it keeps you humble. I think that polarization is very humbling. And I remember, you know, I think it was 2017. I'm not going to say for sure. I can't remember exactly the dates, but we moved from. I flew out of Freetown, having lived in one of the local communities for a month, eating the local food and 7-day power cuts and all that kind of stuff, and ended up in Monaco at the Formula One GP on a boat that was, you know, as big as a hotel, and that polarization very much makes me appreciate my middle ground, because you realise that perhaps being an ultra high net worth individual has its downsides as well, and obviously you wouldn't want to be living on the other side of the fence of abject poverty and having to fight for your food every single day and not know whether your children are going to survive, you know, for a month or a year, or, you know, living for the moment. It's that those kind of things they're both humbling and grounding, and they give you a much broader appreciation of your own life and the things that you're experiencing, and, you know, the stuff that you do is on a daily basis.
I like that story. And just to color my perspective, are you the Hannibal, the BA, the Murdoch?
I don't know. I mean, ultimately, I'm a person that chases after adventure. My father always used to say to me that it's the richest man who dies with the most stories. So I've spent an awful lot of time galvanizing a really solid team behind me that I can trust in pretty much any situation. And I would say that I am I'm the starter. I'm the starter of the riot, if that makes sense. I'm the person that comes up with the ridiculous ideas to go and do this, that, and the other. And I'm also the guy that will always say yes. So if you ask me to do something, have you ever done this, or could you do this? I will always say yes. And that game of yes has led into some crazy opportunities throughout my life, whether that's exposure to people perhaps I otherwise wouldn't have met, or to locations I perhaps otherwise wouldn't have got to, or, you know, and I think that's an important quality in life, because it's all too easy to go through life and not to have taken risks, but to really, really wish that you had have, because there would be nothing more scary for me than to lie on my bed as a 80 or 90-year-old man, if I'm lucky enough to get there, and think, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that, or I wish I'd said yes to this opportunity or that opportunity. That would be my biggest fear, to not have really pursued adventure. I think that would be very, very devastating to go through a life and be an old man and not to have fulfilled your greatest ambition to kind of push your limits, you know, and that's kind of how I live my life, is trying to expose myself to as much excitement as I can, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to say that I'm some kind of adrenaline junkie, but I really enjoy pushing my comfort zone, because I genuinely do believe that your life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
Interesting. I like that. Well, Mason, you've been a tremendous guest. We always have a series of quick hits that we ask everybody, and you can certainly feel free to wax poetic if you like. But briefly, what was your first tour?
My first tour? Let me think. The first time I went on tour was probably with I think I did a run with Kelly Rowland, and she wanted to go to some place in Egypt, which was, she'd obviously been paid some significant amount of money to go to play in a place which otherwise she probably wouldn't be seen dead in. And because Africa had become my specialty, I went with her. And yeah, she was a lovely girl. She's a very sweet person. Yeah, and it was one of those. It was just a small thing. But I mean, I can hark all the way back till, if you want me to talk about things that I did when I was much, much younger, when I was venue security or when I was bouncing, when I was head of Café De Paris, I actually was lucky enough to do backstage and venue with Prince when he played at Café De Paris. So yeah, I guess that was probably one of my first indoctrinations by far.
Interesting. And is there a moment from that experience with Prince you care to relate?
I mean, I'd always been a fan of Prince. I think he was a massive loss to music because I think he was just exponentially talented, not only as a lyricist but as a musician with capability on so many different instruments, etc., etc. But I think he was one of those people where if you believe in a higher deity, that God definitely broke the mold and created someone who was probably a very much a one-off, and that definitely translated in my brief interactions. Yeah, I mean, he certainly didn't have any kind of conversation with him, but he certainly had a presence when he entered the room, and yeah, it was pretty clear that he was king of the castle anywhere he went, pretty much. So.
And do you have a single best moment or experience you could relate?
In my life, in security, or just generally in my life?
Nice. Open to your interpretation.
Best moment of my life. I mean, so at some point during 2000 and I want to say 14 or 15, I can't remember exactly, but it was after the Libyan revolution. We were asked to take care, or my team was asked to take care of the United Nations preferred candidate for the replacement for Gaddafi. And we just assembled an amazing team, which I was TL for, team leader for, and it was constructed from a group of Danish Jaeger Corps, which is, I guess, the equivalent of your American Navy SEALs. And they were ex-Jaeger Corps. But it was 3 months of very intense work, dipping in and out of, based in Tunisia, and the team dipping in and out of Libya. And it was just it was a moment of extraordinary camaraderie where we were living cheek by jowl for extended periods and exposed to a threat level that perhaps most people don't experience in their lives. And at the end of that experience, we ended up in Paris. The principal flew us to Paris, and we had this kind of farewell celebratory meal that we'd had a successful. The mission had been successful for sort of nearly 3.5 months of constant sorties in and out of one of the most dangerous places in the world at that time. And I think that camaraderie was something that I've never experienced before, and probably never will again. That this implicit trust of everyone in their positions, knowing what everyone was doing, and knowing the nuances of their own personal lives and the sacrifices they were making from the point of view of taking risks, but having families, and it was a quite an emotional point when we kind of said goodbye, and that was definitely, I mean, talking security, that was definitely one of the highlights of my career, that we pulled that together. And again, that was certainly living way beyond my comfort zone. having the responsibility of genuinely having the responsibility of people's lives in your hands, not only the principals, but also the guys around you making decisions that could potentially, they may not come back from. That's something that kind of sits in you fundamentally, that you're going to struggle to get past. And that camaraderie is something that I've pursued throughout my life, probably as a backlash or a vacuum from the bullying thing, where perhaps I didn't have any friends, and that was the thing that was missing from my life. But to be the team leader of a team like that you could be so proud of, and that they gave you the respect that you felt that you perhaps deserved for the job that you were doing, and it's kind of like a fulfillment. I think that's one of the things that human beings don't do very well, is that they pursue happiness as opposed to responsibility. And I think that there's a huge thing to be said for creating good moments through creating responsibilities that transgress through a team, and as a very competent and capable tour director, Matt, that feeling of having a successful tour and all the personalities gelling well, and having that kind of that real fundamental camaraderie that translates throughout the entire team, and that even the artist can feel is a buzz. Is something that's difficult to kind of like communicate. But I'm sure you guys, having taught so much, know that feeling that I'm referring to.
That's a fantastic answer. So we got two more for you, Mason. We'll get you out of here. First tough one, and then the easy one. If there was one thing you could change about the concert touring industry in particular, what would that be?
Being able to poop on the bus. No, I was joking. I think sometimes there is a feeling on a tour, and I won't name any names, where the A, B, and C party have this sense of elitist kind of like superiority, and that sometimes kind of trickles down and becomes a bone of contention. Now, anyone who's toured understands that the A party won't be buzzing around with the C party and those kind of things. But I think that, for me anyway, respecting everyone in their position is a crucial and critical part of life. Not necessarily just for touring, but just generally. And I think that it's important that everybody feels valued in any working scenario. And I think that just very, very small acknowledgements can sometimes really make a difference to somebody's whole experience of a tour. And I think it's important that people recognise the fact that everyone has a part to play. Everybody's a cog in the clock of a successful tour, and that's a very, very a good thing to remember. That the guy that the cleaner is I'm not saying he's as important as the artist, but I'm saying that it's important to recognise that it's every part of the engine that makes the vehicle move forward. And that's something that sometimes doesn't translate very well on a tour. And I think that often makes the difference between a great tour and a tour which you're glad to have gone home from.
Well, you may be happy to learn that is actually the most common response we have received out of the now, I want to say you are guest number 22, 23. I would say we've heard that from at least 30% of our respondents, and I love it every time. So we'll get you out of here on this. Any shout outs or parting shots?
I mean, listen, like the Kendrick crew, I miss hugely. So obviously Junior J is somebody that I would sorely love to be back on the road with, and obviously yourself and Dallas and all the boys and the back band and everyone that makes the tour. I mean, I have to say that the camaraderie that exists in that crew is pretty serious. Even right up to Tutis and Mingo and the artist himself, they're all acknowledgement. They all very respectful and decent human beings. And I was definitely hoping that we would be seeing each other this year, and I think we would have been. And it's unfortunate, but just a shout out to the crew, and you guys know who you are, and I hope to be working with you again soon and creating some more stories and adventures, Mr. Walt.
Well, there it is. Another one in the can. Mason Haynes, you've been fantastic. We appreciate you very much. Your wisdom, your kind words, your spirit, your philosophy. It's been real. To my co-hosts, Dallas, Banks, Kyle, appreciate all of you. To our listeners out there, you know where to find us, HLUB Podcast on Instagram, hustlelikeyouBroke.com. As always, send us your questions. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Don't forget to vote this fall. Don't forget to wear your masks. And on that note, thank you and good night.